So Thomas, thank you so much for joining me today. Where are you right now?
My pleasure. Good to see you. I'm actually in Salzburg, in Austria.
So you're preparing, or what's your involvement there in the electric?
Right. You know, this year, surprisingly, but it's actually happening. The Salzburg Festival is going forward with a smaller scale program. My production that I'm working on is a lecture. Franz Welser is conducting, and I'm the head coach. I'm principal coach for a lecture. It's another two colleagues, another coach, cover conductor, and we've been rehearsing, you know, under different circumstances than usual for now like about 5 weeks, and now in production week, and had the piano dress yesterday, stage orchestra tomorrow, and so far, knocking on wood here, you know, it's been going well.
So are you wearing a mask in rehearsals?
Well, they
or is there social distancing?
Very stringent, you say that now,
stringent.
a very comprehensive, that's probably the best word to use for that, protocols, you know, of conduct for everybody. You know, it starts with the fact that the infection rate in Austria is low. It's been edging up a little bit because, you know, yes, they opened up, you know, restaurants and shopping for people to attend without wearing a mask. They're walking that back right now, but the infection rate is comparatively extremely low. So like the likelihood of somebody getting infected here, you know, mathematically is lower than in other places. That's, I think, the first thing that makes this possible. The second thing is we have a very, it's a program, you know, that they developed to keep everybody safe during rehearsals. It involves everybody being assigned to a specific group, depending on how close everybody needs to be in rehearsal, or how, you know, how much they can keep their distance. And each group has a very specific rules of conduct. Absolutely wearing masks during rehearsal is mandatory. Singers have to wear a mask unless they're singing, but in, you know, taking notes or anything, everybody's wearing a mask. There's regular random tests, you know, for people. People had to bring a negative test result before onboarding.
That's good.
Yeah, I think it, you know, frequent hand washing, we contact trace, you know, we keep exact lists of, you know, who we're in contact with. So that's probably
it
the
sounds
best
challenging, but it sounds like they're handling it as well as people can.
It's, you know, they developed it with a team of physicians, and so far one person in the organization has tested positive in the past few weeks. It was a younger lady in the administration in a specific office. She had no symptoms, you know, that's the typical very dangerous case. You know, you have somebody who doesn't have fever or anything else, yet she tested positive, and they sent everybody home in that office, you know, then kept testing them every couple of days. And that was so far, again, knocking on wood, our only positive test result. So, yeah, keeping fingers crossed. You know, of course, the Salzburger Festspiele are supported by, and to a large extent financed by, the federal and state governments, which of course means that, you know, selling every single ticket is not as important as for many other performing arts organizations worldwide, where, you know, you could simply not afford to produce anything unless you could actually sell as many tickets as possible. So there's a certain rules, how many people are allowed indoors by the federal Austrian government. And so, yeah, they're selling those tickets up to that limit. You know, people are socially distanced. They're sitting, you can imagine it, basically you're sitting on a seat. There's nobody to your left, nobody to your right, nobody directly in front of you. It's like a checkerboard kind of seating arrangement. I think if you're living with somebody in your household, you could actually tell them, and then they would seat you together and then extend the checkerboard around them. Everybody needs to give their address. You know, you can't share your ticket to somebody else. It's on your name, so they can trace people. That's kind of what we are experiencing here. So
are you able to enjoy the music making, or are you too distracted by health issues?
You know, we're enjoying it. And to tell you the truth, you know, after you know, like everybody else, being mostly at home for several months and not being able to do our jobs, being able to actually work what I've trained to do is extremely satisfying. And so absolutely no complaints. No, good. It's a good cast. Mr. Welser-Möst has been doing great work with the cast. We've all enjoyed it. Absolutely.
That's one of my favorite operas.
Absolutely. And, you know, wearing a mask, it doesn't bother me at the slightest. You know, it's, and if that's what I need to do to be able to work, I'm more than happy to, you know, I have several colors now. I started with a black mask, you know, I'm now.
Right. And the score is fun to play too. So, yeah. So, well, congratulations. So the reason I wanted to talk to you, getting onto the subject of what we're here for, is you've been listening to and playing auditions for a long time. Though you look very young, you've been in the business for a long time. So I wanted to know how you identify talent, vocal talent,
right?
Or how you've been identifying vocal talent.
How to say that? It's been my good fortune to work for various opera companies, always in a very specific position. You know, I've been, you know, now to Met and Vienna State Opera, and in positions before that, being what you classically would call a head of music. Right. And, you know, probably in any company worldwide, the head of music does have some sort of involvement in the casting, you know, or scheduling process, you know, some more, some less. In my current and specifically my last position, I was heavily involved in specifically also scheduling and ensemble of singers. So it's been very interesting for me because I've never been a casting manager or a casting director. So I've personally never been responsible for or you know, been hired to cast a production.
But don't they coordinate with you?
I've always been in a position where I was more or less, but more than less, asked to participate in the process, especially with my specific, you know, musical background. And that's where you said, you know, it started with, I played in my New York Times as a student, lots of voice lessons, lots of auditions, you know, and I have to say that's of course an experience that I heavily draw on in my daily, you know, life and jobs. And so my specific, you know, interest in and my specific collaboration was always to listen to auditions and identify talent with a purpose. So usually either at the companies I work for, when I listen to auditions, the questions that come to me is, could this person sing that role? You know, so if yes, and why not? Or would you think that maybe she or maybe another colleague would be a better fit for you know, a certain role? That usually doesn't involve hearing my opinion if I think that famous singer A or famous singer B, you know, those decisions are usually above my pay grade. But very much so also in my past job, and that's I think something I can talk about a little bit that might be interesting. I was very much involved in pre-screening singers, especially pre-screening singers for auditions that were either not managed by large agencies or were managed by agencies, and I was tasked with basically making a first selection of who might be invited to sing for the general manager or sing a house audition with a specific you know, purpose of filling a certain vacancy or with actually filling a specific role for production. That's something I very, very much enjoyed over the years. It started with my employment at the Komische Oper Berlin, where my then boss, who knew that, you know, I had a background of living in the States and working in the States for years, you know, asked me if I would be interested in just setting up the New York auditions for that company. You know, they usually once or twice a year would travel to New York and hear singers, you know, in various, you know, sometimes in auditions that were organized by an external organization or that were organized by one or several managers. And then they would listen to those auditions, maybe hire somebody and, you know, fly back home. And he's like, would you be interested to basically do this pre-screening process for us to decide who we would invite to audition, and maybe even pre-screening some singers before, you know, that my supervisor would listen to them. And that I really enjoyed very much, because I came at that from a completely independent position. You know, I worked, you know, under payroll for a company, was not in any shape or form involved with an agency or with anybody else, and could just really, you know, with the next season or the seasons coming up in mind and knowing what the company might actually be looking for, could start looking at CVs, you know, looking at websites, talking to managers, talking to, you know, colleagues, professionals in the industry, you know, ask around. You know, we are looking for somebody for an ensemble that will most likely have to sing the following roles, you know, over 1 or 2 years. We're looking for somebody who might be specifically good on stage, you know, working in very modern avant-garde productions, having to sing in mostly German, or, you know, back then Komische Oper performed mostly in German, which they in the meanwhile broke with. So yeah, there was this conversation to be had, and I got recommendations, traveled to New York, we rented a hall, or we were kindly allowed to be at another organization and use their hall. And that's kind of how I got into that kind of interesting in-between position, you know, and then chose the singers. Then my supervisor would come, you know, enjoyed very much, because the selection of singers was geared towards what he was actually looking for. We would listen then to the second round of auditions. He would make a choice. I could, you know, give my opinion on it, and, you know, we would go home. So that's kind of how it started. I did continue that with the general manager at the Vienna State Opera, you know, who knew that I had been doing this. I've been telling him about it. And so we continued that for, I think, a good 5 or 6 years, you know, where I would actually travel a couple of days earlier, you know, do first round of pre-screening auditions, specifically also for unmanaged singers. And then he would come on 1 or 2 days and just hear several hours of finalist auditions. So that's kind of how that, you know, for about 10 years worked out. I found it very interesting. Sorry.
So for these years that you were doing this, was it mostly with an eye to practicality, that you were looking for specific roles to fill, or was it more general?
At the Komische Oper, it was really specific, because they have, you know, by no means a small season. I mean, they play about 24, 25 productions a season, but they already have a resident ensemble. So that was often very specific. You know, I'm putting it out of my hair, but I mean, next season we're going to do a Butterfly. Calixto Bieto is the stage director, and it will be in German. So, you know, that kind of narrows down what you're looking for very much, isn't it? But then for Vienna, because their season is so large, usually about 50 different opera productions a season with a large ensemble, which during the time of Director Meyer fluctuated around, I would say, 55 to 62. There was much more flexibility. I think Meyer very much had the luxury, or could simply listen to auditions and then, you know, choose somebody to invite into the ensemble, which means it's basically an employee contract for at least 1 year, usually 2, that can be extended. And that he could really choose singers that he believed were, you know, a good fit for the house. And, you know, we didn't really need to specifically narrow down every single role that they would be singing in advance. that will be something we could then decide, when we prepare the next season and prepare everybody's assignments, that could shift around easily. So that was really more looking for vocal and artistic talent that would fit into that specific situation, with a large repertory company performing the way it does and rehearsing the way it does. And then we were really looking for singers who would fit into that environment well. Mehir had it was very important to him that the ensemble was very international and very diverse. So we for him, being able to do auditions in New York, that has a very diverse base of singers, American singers, but also singers who train here. That was very important to him. So, and we always, ended up hiring a very diverse group of singers to come.
So in circumstances like Vienna, when you were doing auditions that were strictly talent-based, that was not to fill particular roles, on what basis did you choose? What were you looking for, you personally?
For the Vienna State Opera, if you find yourself in the ensemble there, you're in an environment where you will be assigned a quite eclectic and large list of roles that you need to prepare. When you're assigned those roles, at this point, it's not entirely clear yet if you will sing or cover them. So all the smaller mid-sized roles traditionally at the house have been covered from the ensemble itself. So if somebody sings Nayade in Ariadne of Naxos, there will be at least one colleague who is assigned as a cover. Those decisions are sometimes made, for the entire season, but in many cases also month by month. They get a list of roles and their assignments 2 months in advance for, if for April, they get it late January. So with that in mind, you are looking for singers that have a very, very secure vocal technique. I think that was always the first, aside anything else, the first thing that was important to us, because working in an environment like that, you can't, you don't have the luxury of being able to prepare something years in advance and, just let it sink in. And, sometimes, you're really in quick succession, even if it's just a small role, but the small roles are sometimes the hardest to perform on stage. Yes. You really don't have much time to kind of get a lay of the land. So you're looking for somebody who is just very secure, regardless of what age they are. Even a young soprano with a good secure technique would do well there. If I turn it around, if in an audition or talking to colleagues asking for feedback, if you would get any indication that somebody is vocally not on secure footing, that would usually be assigned to wait, to maybe just hear them again a year later, to follow them, if you like them. But if there were like real intonation problems or real technical problems, that would, even though that the artist, the voice, everything else would be extremely interesting, that would be a sign for us to wait, because in a large organization like that, there's also not really the resources and the time to deal with problematic technical issues. Add to that, in New York City, you'll find, in the United States in general, you can find extremely good vocal teachers that exactly might do well by you and your personality and your technique and your voice. However, if you find yourself abroad, it's not that easy. I mean, try to find a good voice teacher in Vienna. Of course, there are good voice teachers in Vienna, but it's just not as, it might not be as easy. It might not be somebody who speaks the same technical language that you're used to. And that holds true for a lot of, cities in Germany. I mean, in a small city in a German province, you might simply not find a good teacher that works for you. So you need to arrive there and, to a certain extent, be secure in what you do. So I think that was, to look back at your question, that was always the first thing that really was important to us to be as certain as one could be, to know that somebody has a secure vocal technique.
Yes.
For Vienna specifically, the other thing that was always very important is that the voice will project well in that house. It's not a huge house compared, to the Metropolitan Opera or to the Atlanta Opera or to any other American large, physically large space. The Vienna State Opera is not the largest theater. It seats 1850, has another 400, 500 standing rooms. So it's not by no means a huge place. What makes that theater special, or what sets it apart, I would say, is that the orchestra there traditionally is a very featured element, to put it neutrally, which means they're sitting in a completely open pit that is, in addition to that, quite high. So sitting in the orchestra pit, you can comfortably see the stage. They sit, it's featured. It's an element that traditionally has been important to that house. And what that also means is that the sound of the orchestra, again, to put it completely neutral, is very present in the theater. It's right there. It's not covered. It's not tucked away. They're playing. And in order to sing on the stage there, your voice needs to project. I don't want to even say it needs to be the hugest voice in the universe. That's not necessary. But the voice needs to project well on stage through, and I say on purpose, through an orchestra.
So your job was to assess. I'm saying your job was to assess, or at least you felt your job was to assess whether there was enough resonance in the voice versus Correct. It wasn't about volume, Correct. It was about resonance.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, and with time, I got more secure in my judgment that I could say, knowing what always helps if you hear auditions, if you know one or two singers and you might have already heard them, in other spaces that give you context. And, for me, once I had context, I felt quite comfortable with at least giving my opinion that a voice would work well, for example, in the Vienna State Opera, or wouldn't. That would definitely be part of what was expected of me, to contribute that, to say, would that work? And very often, you could come to that conclusion that, yes, that will work really well. And sometimes you had to come to the conclusion, even though maybe many other things about the audition were terrific, that we say, I'm not entirely sure that will really be successful there. So that was kind of the second aspect that specifically in my function I was tasked to do, to help put that audition in context with our theater and how we would use that singer, how we would cast that singer in that ensemble. Then, in addition to that, sometimes we heard singers sent by larger agencies specifically who were singing for specific leading roles. And then, my function was to just give context to the general manager and, say, yes, I think that would be a good fit. It might be a good fit in the context of an maybe already existing cast, or maybe, how do I think that singer would work with a conductor that's already there. That, to loop kind of back to your initial question, was the other thing that quite often I contributed to. Knowing a lot of the, you can say, sorry, it just turned off. I've been, working for a while now, know a lot of the conductors, I've worked with a lot of them, and, some of them are quite demanding and, what they expect or, demand or what they would like to have in an artist, in a specific show or, in collaboration. And that's definitely something that I could also contribute to. Famous maestro from Italy, you can say with certainty that if a singer would not, arrive with a really good Italian diction, that probably wouldn't go well. That would probably cause a problem that would be difficult to fix, in a production. You can spin that around and say famous German maestro, you know, if the German isn't really at a high standard, that would cause problems. Or, you know, sometimes it's just a question of a certain musical, you know, instinct. You know, sometimes, you know, certain singers would work extremely well with, you know, a conductor or with a cast or production because they have very strong musical skills in a certain area, you know, singing a modern opera. You know, their pitch is just impeccable, you know, and that would definitely then be something that I would ask to contribute my opinion to.
And what about, were you ever asked to contribute to the issues of survival? Will they be able to survive 20 performances of this within a month?
That's tied in with you know, what we've just been talking about. I mean, usually once we got to the point that it looked like we might make an offer, I actually then tried to find time to talk to that singer and to just get a sense of a little bit, you know, where they're coming from if I don't know them, you know, what's their experience has been, you know, how they, you know, just start a conversation there. Because as you say, you know, working in Vienna in the ensemble is not for everyone. I mean, it's a very specific, you know, it goes for 10 months, and for 10 months, you know, we perform every day. That's not for everyone. You know, I mean, some people just love to do a production, have a little bit downtime, you know, be able to focus on something new. That's simply not happening there, you know. And since things can change quickly, anybody who thinks, you know, on their feet and is willing to put in some extra work, even though they didn't expect to put it in at that point, that definitely makes it easier. In Berlin at the Komische Oper, for example, that was less of an issue because they perform more of each single opera. So if you bring, you know, the Marriage of Figaro, in Vienna, typically a run would be 3 or 4 performances at most. Very short. It's just short runs and then something else appears. Whereas in many other German theaters, you know, you have a much higher number of performances for each run. And yeah, that's, I mean, it's depending on what theater you're working for or casting for, that is something to keep in mind. You know, it's very hard for anyone who hasn't been in a system like that to know if that's for them or not. Right. Because it's something you can talk about, but it's kind of really hard to know what it actually means until you do it. Right. And so that's the advantage, you know, for us, for me, for example, having been in a system like that, I kind of know what questions to ask or how to present that information and learn from what I hear. And is that why you would call colleagues, you said, to be able to understand if they're the right person? I think, let's, you know, at least I've been in a very fortunate position that, you know, I think all of us do that. You know, I created my own network of colleagues I've been working with. That might be fellow coaches, that might be administrators in companies that I worked for. You know, I've always made myself available if anybody asks me for my opinion. You know, I'm always very careful, you know, to whatever I say, to not, you know, say anything really, you know, negative. It's not up to me to play, you know, a powerful person. That's not my personality. But if somebody asks me specifically that I know well and that I trust and they trust me, would you think that, you know, the following role in our theater would be a good fit for so-and-so? You know, I can say, I think that would be a great fit. Or I can say, I'm not entirely sure it would be a great fit because. And that's the kind of relationship that I've been lucky to have with colleagues in places that I've worked for and colleagues that I know from, you know, summer festivals. You know, that's traditionally a great place to network and to work with colleagues who might be in completely different countries and theaters. And definitely that's something I would always on my end take advantage of. When I was looking, you know, I knew I was looking for a very specific singer to cast, or just for talent, you know, I would call somebody that I know and say, look, you know, we're looking for, you know, we might have a vacancy for a young tenor. You know, is there anybody that you could recommend that we should hear? And then that's one way of just, you know, collecting information, intelligence, so to speak, that I found very, very helpful. On the other hand, I also was always open to invite singers that I didn't know or where I had no point of contact. In Vienna itself, one of my functions in casting was that we had regular auditions in a rehearsal hall. Like, you know, famously the Met, it's list hall. You know, you have your list hall audition, you know, where you're not singing for the general manager, for the music director, but you're singing for the team of, you know, colleagues who are responsible for casting. And the same thing happened in Vienna. You know, I was involved in that. Another colleague, a lady from the artistic administration, and we would really literally invite anyone that had a prerequisite level of training and you know, at least a little bit of experience, and we simply would invite them to sing a screening audition for us. We would warn them, you know, it might, forgive us please, you might only sing one aria, we might not ask for a second, you know, don't take that as a, you know, any judgment on your performance, but and that way we could hear, you know, we would schedule once a month, you know, 2.5 hours and just hear 20, 25 singers. Yeah, and very often we came away from those auditions having heard somebody who was completely not on our radar, who had no management, that we would then invite to sing in a stage audition for the general manager. And then, you know, every once in a while that would be successful.
So, especially in Vienna, it sounds like your first, the first way that you screened singers was on the basis of their technique. And then if they made it past that hurdle, then it was on their skills, their musicianship, their language skills. What about artistry? Did that come into it at any level?
We haven't even gotten to that point yet. You're absolutely right. And at the end of the day, I think it's safe to say, and it's definitely safe to say on our end, or my end, I'm talking about myself right now, that of course the main reason why we decide to either hire someone or recommend them to be hired is because we are moved by their performance, we are impressed and moved by their artistry, absolutely. So that's, you know, let's call it steps, you know, or let's call it, you know, you're checking off a certain, you know, the best artistry might not yet be ready to perform here or there without a prerequisite solid technique. Let's
not ready for prime time.
Agree on that. But the moment where obviously, you know, we feel confident that somebody has a good solid technique and is healthy, has a healthy technique and sings well, what ultimately moves us is, you know, is the voice. You know, is an interesting, sometimes beautiful, sometimes interesting voice, and absolutely artistry. And that comes in that makes our job so interesting. It comes in a wild array of you know, different setups, and definitely I think it's safe to say that anybody who casts or hires, you know, is looking for an artist that moves us, because audiences, regardless if they're in a small or a large theater, come to performances to experience the music, experience artistry, and partake in something that's unique. And absolutely, that's something then which decides ultimately if somebody will have a successful audition and get hired or not.
Can you analyze for me what you mean by artistry?
Yeah, so artistry comes from art, doesn't it?
Of course.
Kunst kommt vom Können, we say in German. It's kind of like a you know, funny kind of thing. So I think artistry starts with the fact that somebody is, and I'm talking specifically about so-called classical music right now. Because, of course, if you look at artistry in any other art form, I think we're looking at a slightly different setup. You know, I think if you're a jazz artist, you know, there's certain skill sets that set you apart in that genre, which might not be as important in opera, for example. In opera, for me, artistry starts with respect for the music that you're performing. And respect means that I, you know, take the work with the score, with the music seriously, and try the best I can to understand what the composer actually wrote down for us. That means, you know, not blindly following the musical notation, but to kind of really understand what's happening, and then, you know, making it into a performance. In singing specifically, or in opera, I'm a very, I'll say I'm not very visual person. So for me, I regularly close my eyes or I don't look, because for me personally, like what I hear, it has a stronger impact than what I see. So what I'm looking for is that somebody, specifically in opera, uses the music and the text and turns it into something that speaks to me.
So it's what you're listening for.
With,
It's what you're listening for rather than looking for.
Absolutely. And so what I'm listening for is that somebody, you know, speaks the language or sings the language good enough that I, at least, you know, I understand the parts of the text that I really need to understand. You know, we don't need to understand every single word. You know, on a high note, that word might not be the most important aspect of that night. But what I'm looking for is that somebody is able to understand, pronounce, and transport the text of what he or she is singing about, specifically to really not just sing it and, you know, kind of put it forward, but to really speak to me, to engage me. I'm very much listening for that aspect of language, that it doesn't just arrive, but that just kind of speaks to me. It's for I'm quite sensitive to the fact if somebody sings well, you know, pronounces well, but I'm not hearing anything. I'm not understanding what they're saying. I don't even understand what this means, even though I hear the words. That's for me a very important part of the artistry, especially in opera, that somebody can take the text, the words, what they're saying, you know, and transport it to the audience. Artistry also means the ability to color the voice, to sing with dynamic, you know, interesting dynamic, how do you call it, levels? Would you call it levels dynamic?
Yes.
Yeah, with a wide range of dynamic. You know, if I have somebody who's, you know, who is more worried about, you know, projecting as much as they can, that might not be very interesting after a while. So if somebody really is able to bring the music alive, you know, with wide array of aspects, dynamic, language, color, speed, you know, I mean, tempo, you can do so much with Gogic and all of that. The more I get engaged in all of those aspects, the more this singer or this artist speaks to me.
So you're looking for someone who can communicate what's behind the notes.
Absolutely, totally, absolutely.
It's all
For me,
about
that's the
communication.
purpose of opera. I mean, the purpose of opera, you're putting on an absolute absurd amount of effort into an art form that is, we all agree, completely absurd. And you know, that effort only can pay off if all the aspects, and I, you know, recuse myself from the visual a little bit because it's not my thing, but clearly opera is also about, you know, including visuals in the theatrical aspect. Only if, you know, if those aspects are strong, we actually get a payoff, you know, for all the effort we're putting in this.
So when you were casting for the ensemble, did the question ever arise of whether the person their personality would fit in with the group?
Interestingly enough, in Vienna, that didn't really play that large of a role. It's I don't know. It's you know, in the last management, you know, have a new management. Bogdan Rostic is leading the opera now. You know, I know that they hired a lot of new singers for the ensemble. But I'm sure the main aspect didn't change. It didn't really matter so much if somebody. It didn't really read as much, because in such a busy house, it's you know, even if you're, you know, have a little bit more difficult personality, to pick one aspect that's possible, nobody really, you know, there's only so much that will actually show up. As long, you know, as you're a good colleague, you know, you're professional, you're prepared, you arrive
and you
at
can get the job
on
done.
time, you know, you work well with the conductors and the leading teams. Yeah, you know, a little bit of difficulty never really bothered me, at least. My wife always says I probably don't even realize it's happening, so maybe that might be it. But I think in a smaller ensemble or in a smaller house, with longer rehearsal periods, and where you have much more long exposure to each other in a production, that's probably more problematic then, because in Vienna, you know, the Barber of Seville came and the Barber of Seville went. And, you know, and then didn't, you know, nobody really remembered what happened at the Barber of Seville 2 weeks later. So, you know, I'm, you know, you understand, I'm just putting it in kind of a funny way, but
in the context,
in Vienna, you know, we didn't cast for personality, let's say that.
Right. So it was more about getting the job done without causing trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's safe to say that in any job and in any industry, that probably comes down to the same thing, you know, like, you know, treating your colleagues with respect, you know, that means, you know, doing the right thing, you know, that probably works well anywhere.
Now, can we switch over to the American situation? Because weren't you involved for years with the auditions at Wolf Trap?
Correct. Yeah.
So Wolf Trap
I started at Wolf Trap as an apprentice coach, became then, you know, a regular coach, head of music, and then joined Kim Whitman, the general manager, you know, longtime general manager, as a casting consultant on, I would say, 4 or 5 years of audition tours.
Okay.
Exactly.
So how did that vary from what you were looking for in Europe? Was it the same?
What made the Wolf Trap experience so special? And you know, it was more towards the beginning of my career, so-called career. I learned so incredibly much from Kim Whitman. I can't thank her enough, because, you know, those are the experiences that carry you, you know, decades on, you know.
Yes, she's an inspiration.
She absolutely is. And what made that process different and special from many other casting processes I've been part of is that, and I think, you know, Leanne Wisniewski, who is leading the Wolf Trap Opera now, handles it exactly the same. Wolf Trap does not decide on their repertory before casting, but they do it the other way around. They hear auditions and then decide, you know, what could be performed next summer. Which is a reverse casting process. Yes. So you're basically first identifying the talent, and you identify the singers that you would like to invite, and then you think about what could we actually do with them. And that was highly interesting, I have to say. I mean, and Kim, you know, has a mind like a trap. I mean, it's unbelievable. And she just had, I don't know, you know, dozens, but probably hundreds of operas, you know, in her mind. And she had, of course, prepared, you know, also she could, you know, look up everything she needed to know, and would then start to think about how that could fit together. And when I went on the casting, on the audition tours, it was traditionally, I think, 2 shows in the Barnes, which is the smaller venue, and then 1 stage or 1 concert performance in a larger venue. So you're looking at about 3 casts of singers, and the singers would typically maybe not spend the entire period there. So if you're a soprano being cast as Pamina, might mean that you're singing another role in one of the barn shows maybe, but you didn't sing in every production. So we didn't have to look for, 3 operas where you could basically have the same cast perform in them. But it was usually, singers would be featured in one production or have a larger role in one production, and then, maybe a supporting role, a smaller role, or cover in another production. But that process was really interesting because then, you would really start, looking at the season, how would that go together? What role would be a perfect opportunity for the singer? How could they make a next step in their career by maybe, giving them an opportunity that they hadn't had in school or in another young artist program. And it's the auditions themselves were therefore not based on trying to find a Carmen, but it was more like identifying talent that you believe have the potential for a career in this art form, and then thinking about how you could help them and how, not just help, about how you could best feature them and support them in that.
That's how wonderful, though. What a great, how great for them and for you.
It sounds like a very logical thing to do. Wolftrap has been very successful with this model, and I think it's a great way, certainly not the only way, but it's a very, very good way to support young singers, by being able to really, look at the talent first, and then see, how to best offer them an opportunity.
So you could put a higher value then on talent over their ability to survive and make it through, and technique.
Correct.
How wonderful. And you could develop them so that they could eventually survive as well as have that talent.
Exactly.
Beautiful. So how about at the Met? Are you involved in the auditions
in the Met,
presently?
In a comparative, maybe a slightly less involved way than in Vienna. I'm, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, part of the team specifically as head of music, in that I'm asked to attend auditions, sometimes list. I'm not at all the list hall auditions, I'm at some of them, specifically when there is something that I can contribute from a musical side, or from a very specialized opinion. And I'm at all of the auditions in a large theater, in the auditorium. There are not that many of those. And then as part of the team can voice my opinion about that. So it's at the Met, again, the typical head of music, team player, offering my expertise, specifically also, at the Met, obviously, the casting colleagues that do the casting, know the operas extremely well. I don't need to explain anybody, what high notes are involved or something like that. But yet I can still contribute my opinion, having done the productions from the musical side, and or how voices might match, in a supporting cast, or how somebody would do with a cover. And sometimes I'm asked to do, not really coachings, but like working rehearsals with them to try something out. How would it be? Could you please bring something either from that opera or an aria that kind of, is along those lines?
To assess their flexibility? Was that to assess their flexibility? Their artistic flexibility?
Example, or range, or a certain coloratura.
I see.
Or, a certain tessitura, or, ability to sing in a certain language. It usually comes with a very specific, question, would that work in this context? And as I said, I sometimes am at the list hall auditions. I'm at auditions in a large theater, might be at a rehearsal, or as in the Met's case, very often the case, I'm closely working with casts that perform a production that we are performing right now, and then we'll be asked, we're looking for somebody to sing yay role in the future. Would you think that so and so might be a good fit for that? So that's it's a I enjoyed it very much. It's like a supporting casting role, so to speak.
So is it part of your job to know what a specific conductor is looking for?
That's, very much so. I mean, like at any high level casting, that's, I think, it's an extremely important aspect. And since I know some of the conductors that perform at the Met, for example, extremely well, that's a question that I often can answer. I can say, for this maestro, it's certainly very important that the following aspect is at the highest level, and then I can offer an opinion. As, for example, also my colleague in the scenic department might be asked, how would, for example, this singer work with a stage director that they know. It's the same demands that we have from the musical side. Very often, of course, are also being put forward from the scenic, from the stage directors, especially if it's a new production. And that's, of course, nothing that I can answer, but a colleague will be asked that question and contribute.
And what about, are you asked to give your input into a person's musical skills, whether you think they'll be able to handle a piece musically? Because absolutely. I remember one of the judges, long-term judges of the Richard Tucker Foundation, telling me that she had vetoed someone from getting the top prize because they'd made 2 little musical mistakes. And this judge had said they would have caused a performance to come to a grinding halt. And if they're going to present themselves in these arias, they should have them solid.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I haven't really tried to veto anyone yet because of a lack of musical skills, but I've only been at the Met for a season, so maybe I'll put in a veto later. Right. But I mean, I definitely can say, and we usually always give feedback on casts once the show closes. We have a meeting and just, talk about how that went, how the production went, and definitely, the ability to sing all the performances on a high standard is something that obviously is very important and that is taken into consideration.
I have a question. When I was on the staff at Santa Fe many years ago, after each rehearsal, when we on the music staff were required to give an assessment of what how each person's preparedness, and it went back to the administration every day, if a person was prepared enough and if they were flexible and able to make the changes that we were asking them. Does anything like that happen in the major houses where you've worked?
It's basically, that's one of the larger responsibilities of my jobs at the Met, is the musical supervision. And while I don't require my colleagues on music staff to report back to me after each rehearsal, it's a conversation. If I can't attend rehearsal myself, which I try to do as much as I can, that's definitely a conversation I have with my colleagues on a regular basis. We immediately, after the first day that we start rehearsing a new production, assess how everybody's doing, and if there's any problem with the preparation, being it memorization, be it accuracy, language, you name it, we immediately address that. And that's, of course, the luxury of working in a large company like that. We do have the resources to do that, which means that we can ask one of the colleagues assigned to the show to coach, and or I coach myself. We might even say, okay, let's schedule one coaching for the singer, see how that goes. Please give me feedback. If there's continued problems, I will coach with them. So there's definitely a very, very close look at everybody's level of preparedness, not least because our rehearsal periods for new productions are, standard length, but at the Met also for productions that come in repertory that return. It's enough time, but it's not like you can help somebody who comes unprepared.
Right, or doesn't have the musical skills. Or doesn't have the musical skills. I mean, some people don't know how to count or keep a tempo.
Absolutely. If you encounter a problem that's, ultimately fatal, it's up to me to then, either address it or then report it up to my supervisors and say, there's a problem. I see that this, going forward will be problematic. and then, you know, we decide what to do with that. I mean, that's very much part of my position. And yeah, it's not, you know, I don't have in Vienna neither, we didn't have like a codified process. You know, I don't expect my colleagues to send me an email after each rehearsal giving me a full report, but they all know that if I'm not happen to be at that rehearsal, that I need to hear about it, and they will immediately let me know if there's a problem, might suggest, you know, how they would address it, or call me in and said, you know, next rehearsal, you should really listen in a little bit and see what's going on, and then I can decide what to do.
So your door is open and you're a problem solver.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I love about this kind of job. I love working in a team, and you know, I always try to do the best for the company, obviously, but also for the artists involved. You know, everybody comes from different backgrounds, is in different situations, and you know, if we can help, you know, by just doing a coaching or two, or just, you know, providing a little support, any of us is more than happy to do that. And so it's never meant, you know, as a punishment or anything like that, but we all work together to achieve the goal of a really great performance. And yes, if there's a problem that we can't solve together, then that's definitely something that, you know, my supervisors, you know, or any opera company, then somebody needs to make a decision, making sure that whatever, you know, performance we present to the public is at the highest level.
So it sounds like you see yourself as someone whose job it is to enable people to do their best work, whether it be the singer or the conductor or even the stage director. So
yeah,
ultimately for the show.
Absolutely. That's, you know, that's the whole purpose, you know, of working in a team and collaborating. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, that's why you're held in such great esteem with such high value.
Too kind. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, it's true. From what I've seen everywhere, people respect you enormously. This has been incredibly helpful, and I thank you so much, because it's probably getting to be late at night for you, Thomas. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your time in Salzburg and stay safe. I seem to have lost you temporarily. How sad. But we can, since we're having problems with it technically, let me just thank you again. And I really appreciate that. It seems like you're coming back.
Yeah, I'm coming back with, I'm sorry, my phone died.
Oh, okay.
Let me just turn around a little bit. So exactly. So,
okay, I just wanted to thank you for all the time that you've given me. And I think this is a huge help for singers and even opera aficionados to see on what basis people are hired, and what singers should attend to in their studies to make themselves hireable. This has been great. So I thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your time in Salzburg, and hope we can actually see you.
Thank you so much to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.